with the help of the speakers, Luca Baione, General Luca Baione, Professor Alberto Pini, Professor Alexia Massacand, and Dr. Ruggero Poli, that I will introduce more in detail, giving them the microphone. And I don't know if you already read the abstract of this event today, of this panel. And there are a number of questions. Some of them are very general, talking about the opportunities for the European Green Deal, which points will require more attention from policymakers, what virtuous behavior will be adopted by the end users, what will be the role of the most innovative companies in these areas. In a more specific way, and this is something that we are going to discuss with the first, for sure, with the first speaker, the new technology tools related to improving air transport activities, flights, and airports themselves, in order to reduce the pressure on the environment. So we agreed in having roughly 10 minutes for every single talk, then eventually the panel will respond to some questions, but we intend to leave you the chance to address questions to our guests today. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce as a first speaker General Luca Baione. Generale di Brigata, I can translate. Brigadier General. Currently is the head of the General Office of Military and Meteorological Aviation, and it's also a member of the Executive Council on the World Meteorological Council Organization. And it's my pleasure to give you the mic.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And I do thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to address such an important audience, because I'm facing future generations. I'm facing the future, indeed. I don't look at you, Ezio, don't worry, I don't look at you. I look at young generations. So my intervention will be twofold. Firstly, I will address what I deem appropriate, let's say, for the policymakers, for the key leaders, to do, how to approach the achievement, the process to achieve the end state of net zero emission within the European Union. The second part, I will address some concerns about the balance, let's say, between technological development and human factor. We all know that climate change indeed is a game changer. It is a game changer which impacts on all living species, and amongst those species, of course, human beings. It's a challenge which is ahead of us and will stay ahead of us for decades. This means that the project, the setting of the goal of 2050 net zero emission is of utmost importance from the European Union perspective. And I consider it important, maybe more from the political perspective than from the content of the goal itself brings with. Why from the political perspective? Because it gives the sample, it paves the way to do so also in the other world regions. And the point is that if Europe will be the only only region in the world to pursue such end state, it will not be enough. The rest of the world should follow. And to do this, I ask myself what the European Union could do, moreover, beside setting the goal of net zero emission. Well, you all know that the European Union has some 140 delegations throughout the world. Then, if you Google on the web looking for missions and tasks of those delegations, you will find on top priority to work with the concerned country to face climate change. This is the way to spill over the achievement throughout the world. The second point, and then I put this kind of approach as a cross-cutting approach which should not be binded, not be limited within single organizations. European Union should deal with World Meteorological Organization, with other organizations dealing with climate change, such as, strange to say, NATO. Being myself military, I can tell you that within NATO there is a center of excellence named Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence. NATO runs a lot of exercises with the African Union, with African countries, to face climate change. This is the need, this gives the idea of the need to work together between different organizations, between different stakeholders, and bring together, especially, the scientific community with the player at industrial level, at financial level, we were speaking earlier, at end users level, with a cross-cutting approach. A cross-cutting approach should bring us where? Should bring us to save projects, to save money, to save resources, and time is in itself a resource. Therefore, engagement, education, exploitation of different expertise we have throughout the world. Nowadays, being myself the national representative to the World Meteorological Organization, I have to say that we have still way to go, because different organizations work in a silos manner. They have not a cross-cutting perspective where they should have. Second point is let's say, the dichotomy between technological development and human factor. Well, let me borrow a concept from my military background. The concept is related to the military planning. When we plan an operation, we always identify the end state, the achievement, the goal to be reached, and ways and means to achieve the goal. Well, in this paradigm, I see the technological development as the ways and the means, but the end state has to be identified by humans, by human intelligence, because the end state has to be governed throughout the process. And as I said earlier, the process is very long. We, here in the panel, I think Ezio, we will not part of the end state. We will not be part of the end state. Probably you will be part of the end state. But to achieve that target, we have to pursue firmly the process through decades, and to ameliorate, to optimize, to exploit the process thanks to technological development, always under the governance of human intelligence, exploiting artificial intelligence and other devices which will be put on disposal by technological development. Let me conclude by recalling a couple of, let's say, reasons of pride for Italy. I don't know if you know, last year the Italian Constitution was amended for the first time in one of its fundamental principles. Fundamental principles of the Italian Constitution go from Article 1 to Article 12. Well, Article 9 was amended last year since the promulgation of the Italian Constitution, 1st of January 1948, to write that the Republic safeguards biodiversity and the environment, also in the interest of future generations. And this is, I don't know how many countries have such a provision in their constitutional law, but we do have. The second point I would like to emphasize before leaving you is that the Italian Air Force runs one of 31 observatories for the monitoring of the atmosphere. Globally speaking, there are 31 observatories, and one is the Italian Air Force, which is on the Apennine between Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna. And we are proud to say that this is run by the Air Force under the control of the World Meteorological Organization, and the network is called Global Atmosphere Watch. This is the way to transmit, to tell the history, how to work together, how shall we put together our resources, our endeavors. Because running together, we go farther than going in isolation. Maybe in isolation you can go faster, but together we go farther. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you to General Bayone. As a military, the discipline of time will be perfectly respected. I would just add that I would like to be part of the end state anyhow, and this is one of the questions, because in climate change, as in demography, the key word is time. What we are doing or not doing now will affect in 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years. The last data released by the UN organization about demography, for example, leave us with some numbers that are important. And if you're not doing, this is to open another question, but if we are not doing, implementing policies on demography, not just us, even the China has a problem in this respect in the last situation is going to be critical. So the key word is time. We have to act in time, and knowing that what we are doing again and not doing now is affecting possibly even my generation, but for sure your generation. And this is just to give me the opportunity of introducing the next speaker. Oops, sorry, I lost the mic. Okay, here it is. And, no, sorry. Voila. Alexia Massicand is professor at Lewis Business School and at the Catholic University of America. Is currently the founder and director of the platform for international observation of the Earth, www.mountainnow.net, and is senior work plan manager with the intergovernative group of observation of the Earth that is involving 150 in between government, private society, and international organization. Professor Masagan, please.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I should say that I'm delighted to follow on the highly relevant intervention of Generale Baione. Okay, so today there are 3 points that I'd like to discuss with you. And the first one is about electricity. You may wonder why. Well, the International Energy Agency now refers to electricity as the new oil of the global energy system in the net zero scenario. So why the new oil? But before we go into that, I have a question for you. How much of global electricity comes from low carbon sources, according to you? So solar, wind, nuclear, geothermal, all combined? Do you have a guess? Sorry? How many? 10%. Well, actually, we're doing slightly better than that. So it's about 40% at the moment. And one of the objectives of the international community would be to reach about 70% in 2050. But you know, why are we interested in this in the end? Well, because in the context of the Green Deal we just discussed, Europe is on its way to electrification and digitalization. So the combination of the two are really 2 major pillars in the European strategy. So what does it mean? Connected house, connected phone, connected watch, connected car. With regard to the car, we can get back to that in the discussion if you're interested. Is that the way to go? Well, it's a question I'd like to ask you as well. Maybe you could argue, provided the electricity is green, so low carbon, and reliable, because as you probably experienced yourself over the past 2-3 years with what happened in Ukraine and the overall situation in the world in terms of geopolitical instability, the impact on the overall energy sector has been tremendous. So obviously costs are something also to integrate in the story, and also for us as consumers. I'm sure that you or the people living with you have been pretty negatively surprised over the past few years looking at the electricity bills that they were receiving. Another key issue in the context is that of privacy. Getting connected in every way possible is fine, but at the end of the day, to what extent are we protected? In fact, some of my students were telling me last week that very often they felt that their phones were actually spying on them. Do you have that impression sometimes, that you have a conversation and all of a sudden your phone sort of releases some kind of advertisement or whatever, so it's somehow listening to you? So the conclusion, according to my students' own words, that it was creepy. So, you know, but the creepiest part of all was that they didn't really know which application was actually causing this. So, food for thought in the context. Okay, moving on to the second point I have for you. Well, it's connected to climate prediction, in fact. We've been talking a lot about artificial intelligence in that festival and machine learning, so I would just like to give you a couple of examples of how that helps and also of some of its limitation. Recently, a team from Imperial College London realized that, in fact, there was a very simple relationship between the concentration of ozone, which is also a greenhouse gas, in the atmosphere, and temperature, so simple air temperature. But the implication of that in terms of computing and predicting the climate is very significant, because it means that instead of using the usual laws of physics, all of a sudden you can just compute ozone distribution throughout the atmosphere at the push of a button, saving a lot of time and energy in terms of performing your computing operation. The second example in which machine learning is helping a lot is that you may know that, in fact, whenever we use climate models, we don't use a single model. We use a combination of models, up to 20 plus models, in fact. But how do we combine those models is the question optimally. And it's based on the assumption that a model will be flawed in a certain way and that the other model, the strength of the other model, will be able to compensate for the flaw of the other one. So that's why we combine the models. But how to do it optimally? Their machines can really be helpful also based on the statistics that they hold. And the final example is one in which machine learning actually does not help in terms of climate modeling, at least at this point of time. This is really about ocean simulations. All the processes that refer to longer time scales, so we're not quite sure yet what's happening. The inertia is quite large, so machines are really not good at predicting at those much longer time scales. And the third point I wanted to bring your attention to is that, of course, your generation is very aware and probably also already using ChatGPT. Well, have you ever wondered about the environmental impact of ChatGPT? Well, just a couple of maybe pointers in that direction. So, if we think of the carbon footprint, you think environmental impact. So the reaction is to say, okay, in terms of carbon, first of all, what do we have? Well, the response to that is in fact very vague because the cloud providers are in fact not disclosing that information for the moment. So there is a real lack of transparency in terms of the amount of energy that is being put into the functioning of the whole artificial intelligence, eventually delivering ChatGPT. But beyond the carbon footprint, what is interesting is to actually realize that there is a water footprint, which is highly significant as well. And if you want to get an idea of that, if you exchange with ChatGPT for, about 5-10 minutes, 20, 30 questions, you will have used the equivalent of half a liter of water. So you may think, okay, well, it's not such a big deal, but if you multiply that by 1 billion users, all of a sudden, the impact on the water availability becomes quite significant, especially in a world where water scarcity is already one of the key issues of our time. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you, Professor Messigan. General Bayona previously was referring to the necessity for cross-cutting. Let me give you an example of cross-cutting in another subject. We all, you too, experience the effect of COVID-19. And not a single scientist in the beginning of 2020 was thinking as possible to have a vaccine in 11 months. That was the result, okay? And this was possible for two main reasons, because there were researchers all over the world working on the very same platform, biological platform that was used to produce the vaccine from 20 years. So they were already working on the platform with a different goal, and it was sufficient to change the target. But moreover, altogether, because the world started immediately to exchange all the possible informations, even with China. All the scientists all over the world, they started immediately to work together. So what we were discussing before preparing this panel was that we have data, we have information. Sometimes there are people working on the same subject for many years, they do not exchange data, they do not exchange results, and we are doing the work 300, 400, 500 times. So in this respect, it's a pleasure to introduce you Professor Pirni, that is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the Scuola Sant'Anna in Pisa, because he's actually working together with some in some aspects with General Bayone. Professor Birni is member of the board of the College in Politics and Human Rights Sustainability at the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna, and in the managing committee of the Integrated Graduate Program in International Studies and Transnational Governance, always at the School of Sant'Anna, and together even with the School of International Studies at the University of Trento. So please have the.
Good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for this invitation. Thanks for this wonderful opportunity for sharing some of my preliminary thought and also perhaps my preliminary concerns devoted to this topic. The topic that is at the center of this roundtable and that will be at the center of our common life in the very next year, but it's already on our table. Well, let me follow up the words by our president and also the words that formerly General Bayone offered to us and shared with us, trying to focus my intervention exactly on a twofold topic. The topic is the linkage, the structural and systemic linkage between what we might call the technological development and the human factor. These were the two aspects highlighted by General Bayone, and I would love to start enlightening this process by, let's say, bringing to the table one point taken from the most, let's say, closest news. If any one of us has already read the daily, let's say, press, international press, well, perhaps has read also this new mantra that President Sunak, so the Prime Minister of the Great Britain, launched today. Long-term decision for a brighter future. This is the slogan. It might be odd, following up the title of our conversation, or not odd, promising, evocative, or elusive, we'll see. But there is a kind of follow-up, and there is a kind of, let's say, remark that he had that in the international press repeated, starting from his inaugural speech. And the point is the following. He said, President Sunak said, artificial intelligence is dangerous as a nuclear war. Well, this is a kind of a strong statement, strong affirmation that deserves to be, let's say, put on the center in a sense of our attention, not for, let's say, following up what is a political debate, which is interesting by definition or per se, but is also might be interested or might be at the center of our discussion also by being in this exactly in this very place, which is Centro Studi Americani, and being pretty at the end of a really intensive series of appointments devoted to diplomacy today. Well, what I would love to address and to grasp from President Sunak's speech, well, from a philosophical point of view, we might say that this point in our age, our very moment, is a kind of a super hyper historical point. Well, one might say, okay, every moment is an historical moment. Every moment deserves to be enlightened and focused. But we are really on the verge of a kind of a before and for sure a kind of after. Before, well, we all were born before the same, let's say, articulation of the expression artificial intelligence, that's for sure. But we will proceed our daily path by not more avoiding this possibility. In doing this, in taking into account the fact that we have to tackle and to address a before and an after, we shouldn't avoid considering the fact that that element, technological issues, should be strongly scrutinized in order to follow up, in order to focalize on limits and on borders of the possibility, but also of the possible risks. Well, limits and borders are not synonymous, but let's give to this another piece, or perhaps another moment if we will have time. As for us, as for this preliminary take of our point, let me just focus on another preliminary, but also really central issue. If we have to take into account borders/limits of artificial intelligence or technological instrument as a whole, we have also to not forget the possibility that they open, and that the possibility that they are opening in super or hyper technological sectors as that one so that Professor General Baioni mentioned. So, for example, the the weather forecasting or the climate change scenarios. This is a sector in which technological issues, technological equipment is by definition to be part of the game in a sense. But what we are trying to do, I'm saying we in a kind of, let's say, generous I was saying, now it's super working. I was saying that what we can do, well, from this point of view, we are trying and saying I would love to say that I'm honored to work together with General Baioni, his staff and other colleagues, estimated colleagues both in Italy and in Geneva for the World Meteorological Organization, and within and together with other university structures and institutions, trying to do a single passage, trying to tackle a single challenge. The challenge is exactly one segment of the linkage that I mentioned at the very beginning. Do you remember? Technological development and human factor. Just to use or reshape the language of diplomacy or the language of international law, for example, we would love to prepare, promote, enhancing, and enforcing not just and not only the technological issue. This is not a matter of a topic. This is not a cup of tea for a philosopher, rather the human factor. In order to get prepared to what is happening, what is going to happen. And in doing this, following the specific and dedicated and peculiar attention that General Baioni and other colleagues of his colleagues decided to give to these aspects, we tried and we are trying to promote and to realize two kind of educational paths and educational avenues. Well, I don't know if you are familiar or not with the organization, World Meteorological Organization. Let me just remember that the World Meteorological Organization is used to have three keywords. One is weather, of course, the other one is water, and the third is climate. And that organization is used to define and divide the world into 6 regions, from region 1 to region 6. For your and our shared knowledge, Italy is part of the region number 6, and General Baioni, as he already mentioned, is just been appointed as our representative in the Executive Council of that institution for the region 6. The region 1, beside, is the region that covers the entire African continent. Well, we are trying to promote a kind of twofold path, which is trying to gather both region 1, African continent, region 6, Europe, intended in the geographical meaning of the term, so not just l'Unione Europea, so United Europe, or the Europe of catering 27 states, but also Russian Federation, Turkey, and other states that are geographically belong to Europe, but not politically in the truest sense of the term. Then the point, going so in that sense to the conclusion, but trying to focus on the human factors, enforced human factors towards and vis-a-vis the technological measure, is covering a kind of triple challenges, so three challenges that are one linked to the others. The first one is try to give a content and a meaning of what is the new mantra of World Meteorological Organization, which is early warnings for all. So which are the basic values grounding this measure, this comprehensive framework that is going to be applied, is going to be put in exercise for the whole 6 regions, having in mind that first and foremost, Africa will suffer for the, let's say, supervenient climate change exchanges and modification of the comprehensive way of life. Second point, the idea of enhancing and getting prepared from the human point of view, trying to give and to offer to the human operators in this hyper-technological sector as weather forecasting and climate change provisions with a more nuanced, faceted and rich decision-making capability. This will be the second one, looking at the technique like moral dilemmas and other ethical instruments that might enrich the capability to react and to take more appropriate decisions towards very urgent issues. Third, last but not least, the least, well, we are used to think that weather forecasting, meteorological issues, climate change issues are issues that are deserving as hyper-technological communication. Well, this is true, by definition true, but this is not enough. What we realized during this preliminary series of works is that we are running the risk of losing a systemic war and battle. The battle and the war is against the army of denialists, the army of who is trying to say, well, nothing is happening, all is going well, this is just a geological sector. We don't have to stick our attention on anything specific. They are armed, since they are able to communicate. So our third point, they are able to communicate and they have a lot of, let's say, of guns, of possibility for communicating. Our challenge will be try to provide to the human factors, meaning personnel enrolled in those institutions, an adequate, a more adequate, and enhanced way for communicating. So ethics of communication in very urgent moments or in very dangerous situations will be at stake as our third challenge, and trying in this way, comprehensively taken, fundamental word, decision-making processes, ethics of communication, trying to offer a nuanced opportunity for perhaps not winning, who knows, but perhaps trying to face this war, this battle from the human-centered point of view with more accurate and, let's say, sharp instruments and theoretical and ethical tools. Thanks for your attention.
Last but not least, Ruggero Poli, a man that put his hands on this subject, meaning that is a man that already worked in order to reduce the impact of the problem that we are facing. He's already been Director General and CEO of a number of companies in the area of energy and aviation and transport and mobility. And so currently is the Director of the Energetic and Decarbonizing Transition sector in Mundi's company, and to the Aeroporto di Roma. So giving him the mic, I would like to know from him what we already have done and what is possible to do in the future.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I am the last one probably, so I try to be short. I will try to answer to one question. It's possible to understand if a company is really innovative and committed to sustainability and climate change on one side, and what can we do on the other side? So a lot of companies are advertising their climate change commitment and what they are doing, but it's really difficult for the consumer to understand what there is behind. So there are 2 or 3 certifications that are quite complex to get in this world, and one of the most complex is SBTi. It means Science-Based Target Initiative. And this kind of certification requires to the company to measure their emissions, so to measure detailed scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emission, and then requires to the company to set a goal to reduce this emission according to Paris Agreement. And then there is a check every year that the path to reduction is real, is not just advertising. So up to now in the world, around 4,000 companies have reached this SBTi commitment, and 1/3 of the world capitalization is included in this company. So there is really a chance to really act. But the final decision is always to the men who manage the company, to the men who work in the company, on one side to decide to really approach this SBTi target or other target equivalent like CDP. On the other side, we can decide what to consume, where to go, and what to do, trying to understand if what we buy is really reducing climate change. Always, maybe not always an easy decision, but at the end of the day, also this little decision is in our hand. So we need to keep our future in our hand, taking the good decision. If we talk about the carbonization of transportation, the main role will be made by alternative fuels. So actually we are using fossil fuels, as you know. The alternative fuels are of 2 types. One is drop-in, so they can use an existing combustion engine, and there are like HVO, biodiesel, that reduce by 90% the emission. So you can keep your diesel car, but you use biodiesel and not diesel, and this reduces by 90% the emission. On the other hand, as you know better than me, there are the electrical cars. That is a great solution, but unfortunately could not be the solution for all the world because of a lot of problem of materials, of price, of impact. So we need to analyze these alternative fuels in a regional specific details. So each region will find a complex and diverse solution to decarbonize the mobility. If we talk about aviation, actually in aviation is available the SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. This is done using used coconut oil or fats, and it reduced by 90% the emission. It costs more or less the double, but what can we do as a normal people? Last week I fly from UK to Italy because I went to meet my daughters, and I decided to buy SAF for my flight, and I just spent 30 euros on top of the ticket of the flight, not to emit CO2, because in this case I really bought this SAF. So we also can do something, and it's important that we work together. So the company, we as a consumer, as a normal people, the EU that sets a very good regulation and targets, and then the financial world that gives money to these innovative companies to create these new fuels. Thank you.
My experience, I never saw a panel so respectful about the time, so I'm very pleased to say that we have time for questions. I don't know if somebody's already ready for questions. Yes, please. Can you tell us your name? Okay. If you can tell us your name, okay.
Hi, I'm Ghali Ababne. Thank you all very much for joining us today and for informing us. My question to you is it a bit null for us to be expecting this big shift in the way that we consume our energy and our approaches to climate change, considering the fact that governments and states have not changed their behaviors in the way that they emit CO2 emissions? What I mean by that is the fact that wars and conflicts are very much a significant impact. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's about 5.5% of our carbon emissions. And you know, with the context of the Russian-Ukraine war creating over 200,000 tons of emissions, and the Syrian war in total making around almost 13 million carbon ton emissions, and the fact that Israel is has bombed 33 something per, you know what I mean? There's this pattern of governments really committing such a big crime against nature in their conflicts, and yet humans, individuals, are seen as the ones responsible to take care of it. Thank you.
I would say quite a question. Professor Pini, do you want to answer? No, I mean, you were... no. Yeah, please.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thanks indeed for this speech and for letting us know your opinion. Well, as you know, as you probably know, in these very days, meaning the last week ended here in Rome, very important kermesse, and perhaps someone of you was involved in this kermesse. This was Youth for Climate. You know, of course, you know that initiative, right? I guess. And then, in that case, there were dozens or perhaps centuries of young people and young generations in this by reusing this perhaps quite abusated point, trying to say and trying to offer and to propose to politicians measures, remarks, options, ideas for changing their mind. But a good way for replying to that, and so, well, we're gonna see, we are all curious to discover more in depth the entire of the whole proposals that will be discussed also and presented also during the next COP in Dubai and starting from the end of November. But what is at stake here? I would try to be slightly provocative, saying that, well, you said government have not changed their behaviors, their opinion. I quoted, I took a note coming from your state. But are you sure that the people did? Are we all able to follow the line that the last speaker, for example, raises? Which are the renounces that you are able or available to do? Well, let's consider that governments are just a kind of, let's say, pretty restricted visions, which is the political turn. So that's a wonderful proposal. That's something that deserves to be done, but please not in my political term. I can sign the decree, the regulation, but which is a pledge for 10 years from now, at least, or 15 years from now, at least. But then this is what I'm trying to do also in my own personal research. I'm teaching also and doing research also in ethics and climate justice. So which is the individual contributions? What are you able and available to renounce to? For example, let's imagine to have potable and public water just for 2 hours a day. Let's imagine to have the possibility to use electric energy in intermittent period for 15 minutes, four slots of 15 minutes during the day. Let's imagine that you are no more allowed to move with your own car or guzzling, let's say motor road or whatever. Then it's fine. Then the proposal, which is the proposal? Are you able to accept this proposal? Because if we have to change, it's not a change that is just and only on the shoulders of someone, excluding someone other for taking responsibility towards those challenges. So if your answer to these provocative words, of course, is yes, then we can start discussing again. Because the politicians are just giving voice to what is a hyper-resilient common opinion, which is saying, okay, nice, I know that this is a problem, but let's move on with my TV, telecommander of my TV. Let's move on looking at the next news or whatever. So which is the daily emergency? Now the word in Israel, tomorrow, who knows, some emergency in Canada or whatever. Full stop. So if you want to stick these discourses, want to raise the most important and coherent consequences of your discourse, start saying what you are able to renounce to in the first person point of view. This is the point of redeparture and for a new alliances, also between politician and non-politician, between public spheres at a transnational level, between young, less young, more than young generations. This was my point.
Thank you. If I may add, as an unmoderated moderator, I have an example for you in another field that I was referring before. I'm sorry, I cannot see anymore. Yeah. The restriction in liberty that we all suffered during the COVID. The national epidemiologist in Sweden made a sort of deal with the population. He refused to propose to the government to have strict policy of in order to having locked down the population. Obviously, Sweden is a huge country and just 10 million, 11 million people live in Sweden. But he proposed a sort of deal. Are you able to restrict your liberty in order to save the country from this virus? Meaning, we are not forcing you to be home, but we are proposing a sort of deal. Say, you are free to come out of your houses, but you have to respect some rules, not because I'm telling you to respect the rules, but because you can, in yourself, find a way of respecting these kind of rules that will save eventually the epidemic. So maybe it's another way of putting the question. There are other questions? Yep.
Originally from Zimbabwe. I have two questions. The first one being, we have interacted with a lot of environmentalists, technology experts, but personally, I feel the problem is a lack of representation. We haven't seen a single person under 30 who's talking about AI, who's talking about climate change. It seems like most of these decisions, most of these discussions are being held by you could say the senior citizens, but there's not really a lot of young people that we see talking about these issues. And then on the second question, so please pardon me in advance, but the industrialization process was achieved through the subjugation of the African continent, of which after its completion, most of the African continents and most of the third world was left underdeveloped. And industrialization is one of the biggest causes of the carbon footprint and the climate change that we're currently fighting. So now we have this phenomena of, pardon me, but greenwashing things, as in like they sell them, they just greenwash them and then they sell them to people. And then you mentioned, sir, about electric cars, how they're not going to be viable for everyone, mainly due to availability. And just this week, we had a meeting with the German ambassador, of which he proposed that Germany's biggest ambition is having at least 1 million electric cars on the road. And I was just thinking, so is this new climate program just another form of industrialization? Because at this point, it greenwashes everything electric cars, but electric cars run on lithium, of which there are limited reserves in Germany, and he said that they would source out from China, but also underneath, China gets a lot of its resources from Africa. So is this green movement just another form of industrialization to which third world countries will be left behind? Thank you.
Voila.
Maybe two comments. The first one on your remark, which is very clear. I mean, climate change is often referred to as the perfect moral storm, in the sense that the responsibility of developed nations is obvious. I mean, it's enough to look at the accumulated emissions since the end of or the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And this is very clear that developing countries have a right to demand the technology transfer that is now highly necessary, not only for developing countries, by the way, but for the entire world. The other point is that we just discussed before the role that individuals can play. Well, I always like to remind that, you know, it's really 3 levels that we're working on: individuals, business, corporations in general, and governments. I mean, governments are instrumental in terms of providing incentives, regulatory frameworks, and so on. And however, having said that, in my view, there are a lot of contradictions in the climate change context. The various wars were just mentioned. We could also take the very simple example of the organizations of the Convention of the Parties. I mean, every meeting, every year, you know, how high is that carbon footprint? It's increasing every year, by the way, but still thousands of people, thousands of lobbyists as well. I mean, oil lobbyists, I mean, and this year in Dubai, I mean, you may argue it's not Abu Dhabi, but it's still Dubai. I mean, do we have a conflict of interest there? Just maybe? I'll stop there.
You have the last one.
Okay, I cannot pass over to the operator there. No, my comment would be back to my experience in the WMO. What I'm pushing for with regard to the issues you mentioned, I'm pushing for a policy which should be developed along line 2 criteria: centralized planning, decentralized execution. This means that policies and states' achievements could be set at a global level, but the implementation of each of them is to be shaped on the specific needs of each country and each continent, because needs, situation, and geographical position does matter. And this is to say also another point: the industrialization of African country, paradoxically, could be an opportunity to jump over directly to the new era. I understand your point, and I remember the words of the Ghanaian president at COP27. He said, yes, we are all under the same thunderstorm, but we are not all on the same boat. And this is very true. And I remember those words, and I keep them as a guideline. But since I have the microphone, I also try to give some comments on the previous question. When I said in my intervention the human factor in charge for governing the process means exactly this, that you mentioned some, let's say, criticalities, and criticism is always welcome. Criticalities such as the wars in progress are like fog, clouds, thunderstorm when you are on the boat, but you should never lose contact with the sea light. And this is on the shoulder of policymakers. We have to overcome what the problems are. We cannot deny that there are problems. There is a huge increase of emission of greenhouse gas. But this is why the human factor should be above the technological development. And I conclude with another stimulation. I tell you that if internet was a state, you know what the CO2 footprint would be? Would be 1,600 billion tons per year, which means it would be the fourth emitter state in the world, and everybody use the internet. So we are to be criticists, but we have to also to propose way forward.
No, well, if I can just add a couple of words to this, to Helen's remark and question. Well, I really appreciate your point, Helen, and I would say that, well, exactly during the last COP, the COP that has been just mentioned, the COP27, we promoted 2 meetings devoted to reshaping the relationship between the so-called global north and the global south. This is a kind of a comprehensive framework in which your points is part of, in a sense. No? And also I've been promoting since 3-4 years a seasonal school devoted to the ethics of climate change, reshaping responsibilities for present and future generations, in which one of the points is exactly that one that you mentioned. I would rephrase your point as a kind of African paradox, which is a unicity in the whole world, I would say. So African continent taken as a whole is the continent which is gathering the most massive number of young people. But this is also the continent which is embracing and embodying the most traditional way for governing people. Therefore, we do have a kind of this coupling or this entanglement between who is at the very basis of present and future public spheres and who is sitting down in the, let's say, ivory places, in the ivory palaces. This is a massive a massive challenge, because African is not just something which we can just try to avoid, try to put out of any kind of consideration. Therefore, I said at the very beginning that one of our curves, one of our activities, we as a Sant'Anna school, but not just Sant'Anna, other colleagues in other universities, there is CNS, University dell'Aquila, University of Rome, and other universities are trying to say, is devoted exactly to Region 1. So let's try to educate, not stop raising arguments and raising awareness towards this, what I would call the African paradox, but we can rephrase this paradox as much as you want, but the point is exactly this. So try to overlap who will be in charge for guiding the country and who is now guiding the country. So it's time for a kind of massive let's say, I don't want to say revolution, but a massive and systemic reform coming from taking responsibility from the entire world, not just a matter of dividing or dialectizing north and south, but just a matter of rephrasing the capability and the responsibility of everyone. And we do really hope that the African voices will raise in a very strong way and will be really companion of this unique challenge that we have as a humankind. Thanks again, you, Alan.
Hi everyone, thank you for giving us your time today. My name is Adeze and I'm British and Nigerian. So my question was actually for everyone, but specifically based on something that you said, Ms. Masakan, about how using, I think you said using ChatGPT for like 2 minutes or so is equivalent to like our police reporter. So I've always wondered this, when people make like an equivalency between like the use of the internet or something like that and a resource. So how are they related? And based on that, would you say that our use of, we have a responsibility to stop like the depletion of certain materials based on how we use the internet? And then to build on that, I wanted to ask how we're supposed to do that in a world where things are increasingly online and virtual, because sometimes it feels like there's no way to limit our use of the internet. And I say this as someone who, like, I care about the environment. I think I try to be environmentally conscious, but there are some things like even just university, we can't not use the internet for a lot of things now. So it kind of feels impossible to have this responsibility on us. So what would you suggest on an individual level and also as a community that we could do to I guess, decrease our impact on the depletion of certain resources?
And not just that, we are normally very nervous when the connection is late, it's slow.
Thank you. Well, thanks for that. Well, first about the connection between water and the actual use of ChatGPT, it's all the data centers basically that are behind all the calculations that are going on. I mean, they need to be cooled down. I mean, it's the same thing for a nuclear reactor, by the way. They generate so much heat that water is used basically just to cool them down. And then, in terms of your personal responsibility, in my view, it's more about being aware, of this impact, and such as to fully integrate that in the various climate change adaptation strategies that may be developed. I would argue that there are probably some priorities in terms of generating some carbon footprint, water footprint, and the use of the internet in today's world is probably one of those priorities. Do we want to go into, then the contradictions that we discussed before, war, organizations of meetings with thousands of people traveling the world, are they really priorities? I'm not so sure. So I guess in the current context, also the world needs to make some strategic choices. And as an individual, to me, as long as you're true to yourself, doing whatever you can do to reduce, your carbon footprint, especially if it's easy, you turn the tap off, obviously, and so on, all those things you should do. But for the rest, you are not responsible, for everything that's happening around you. And what we need, what the world truly needs, is a revolutionary source of energy, or sources of energy, rather. At the moment, and actually fusion might be the one we need. The only problem is that before it actually becomes fully operational, we may have to wait to 2050 and possibly to the end of the century, fingers crossed. So in the meantime, we need to prepare for the energy transition, but there will be no panacea in the story. Before the electric cars were mentioned, obviously they are fundamental issues associated with electric cars, with the production of the batteries themselves. Some of them are very strategic, the supply of the so-called critical minerals, lithium itself, tungsten, manganese, etc. All those minerals are rare by nature, and they actually, by the way, pose major issues from a geopolitical point of view, because the countries that are the richest in those resources are among the most unstable ones politically as well. So no panacea between now and 2050, but my recommendation would be for the international community to focus on energy policy and fostering the development of truly revolutionary energy sources as quickly as possible.
There are other questions? Yep. It was the first one and it's going to be the last one, okay?
Sorry, thank you. I wanted to kind of build up on asking about that. We've talked about paving a pathway for the future. And I don't know why but that reminded me of the fact that there have also been discussions about if the investments that we've been making in, oh God, sorry. Basically, some people have been saying that there needs to be an investment in, okay, is this better? Oh, okay, thank you. Basically, there have been some discussions. All right, thank you. You've mentioned about the fact that, oh God, sorry. Okay, yes. There have been a lot of discussions about migrants and refugees coming in from the climate, and basically I wanted to ask how we can how that will look for the future and how we can adapt our environmental policies and our approaches to energy and our approaches to energy with this new shift of environmental refugees and environmental migrants. Thank you.
I would say that you're very faithful about the expertise of the people on this panel, because it's quite, you started with a very impressive question and it's ending up. So somebody wants to...
Not straight on the point, but something related to that. Let's say climate migrants, climate refugees. Yes, there is also another issue I want to bring to your attention to let you be aware of the magnitude of climate change. Guess that during the season, rainfall season, there is a certain percentage of baby warriors in Africa. During the dry season, the percentage is triple. This means that there is also an impact on security and defense in those areas you are mentioning. In this regard, since I said amongst the initiatives to put forward, education is one of the most important. And we spoke about education in relation with many issues. Education is the center of gravity of your future leadership, because you are the leaders of the future. In this regard, if I may, we are going to present to COP28 a catalogue of education and training managed by different Italian entities, and I would like to see some of you or some of your friends or some of the leaders of your country visiting us in Dubai and looking at what we can do for mostly African countries to keep them aware, to keep young generations aware of what the risk is and what the mitigating measures could be.
So I think we are just in time with the schedule, and I would say on the behalf of this panel, we want to thank you because the questions that were addressed were very, very well thought and very meaningful. And as an adult, I would say that you have to be as demanding as you were today now on with your people, with your governments, with the institutions, because this is the key factor to bring us to do something useful for the new generations and for you to do something for the future. Because again, I would say another time that I would be more than happy to see at least the beginning of the end state, not really the end, but at the beginning of the end state. So thanks a lot, General Luca Baioni, Professor Pirni, Professor Massaca, and Dr. Poli for being part of this panel. Again, you and the organizers of the Diplomacy Festival, and so have a nice weekend.